My name is Brossoit. I have the honor of working as your superintendent. This is now my 10th year as superintendent in the Edmonds School District. Actually, it's my 20th year as a superintendent in the state of Washington and 30th year in public education. It's just been a real interesting series of 30 years, but it seems like it was yesterday when we started. And it's been just fun for me being in different places and meeting so many neat people in our schools that care about kids and in the community that care about schooling as well. I'd like to tonight spend just a moment or two doing some introductions. I see some familiar faces and some new as well. I also want to point out that Vince Camaro and some of the Hawkeye Broadcast Network students are here. They're recording this for something that they're going to use at school and make that available. So I'd like to thank the students for being out here tonight, but also to let you know that it is being recorded. So if you don't want to be viewed, you can just kind of go like this or hold up your sheet or whatever. I think they're mostly going to be embarrassing me in the process, not you. So you're probably safe in that respect. But thank the students for being here. Sitting down here in front is Stuart Meyer, our Executive Director for Business and Operations. Appreciate him being here. Susan Young is our principal at Westgate Elementary School on an interim basis, and she's here tonight. Corey DeMunn, one of our school board members, is here. And looking for Diana White, another school board member. Susan Phillips, a school board member as well. Robert Johnson, assistant principal here at the high school. See Doug Sheldon, president of Pacific Little League and parent, involved community member. And Bill Henning, who is probably in the school board, a lot of our staff. Huge volunteer and helper in our school district. And I don't recognize some of the rest of you. Appreciate some of our staff who have come out tonight. Thanks for being here as well. And hopefully there'll be information that's of value to everyone. So again, tonight is our fourth meeting of 4 that we have in the fall, and we move these around the district, and the idea is just to provide basic information to anyone in the community about our school district. I won't have specific information about Edmonds Woodway High School. You will get that better from staff and from the administration at the building. So tonight is more of a district perspective, maybe a little bit more in terms of the state level as well. But we have information to share with you tonight about the school district, and also a very important election coming up on February 11th in the Edmonds School District. So let's start with the basic information, and I'll get you into that. And then at the end of my comments, I'm going to open it up for questions, and be happy to answer questions about anything we talk about tonight, or other things that you're just curious about that are happening in the school district. Again, if we don't know, we'll take notes, get your information, try to get back to you. But I just want to really thank people for coming out tonight. You should have, with the handouts that you've received, a small 8.5 by 11 that says highlights on the top. And I don't have one to hold up, but not much of the PowerPoint to help me out. You've got an English and Spanish version on the back. It's the highlights, 2013-14 school year highlights. This is yours to keep. I certainly don't need to read it to you, but it's really an infomercial about different things that are happening in the school district. Would like to point out the box in the middle on the right-hand side that shows how our students do taking the SAT compared to the state and the nation. This is a pretty interesting perspective because a lot of times you hear people asking questions, well, how do I know how our students stack up compared to kids from other states? Because we don't have the same test necessarily in the state of Washington that other states have. But the SAT is the SAT, and that's given pretty much every year. It's the same version that kids take across our country. The state of Washington does very well with the SAT. In some years we've been tied for first, some years first place alone. This last year the state of Washington, I think, was in 4th place of states where a lot of kids take the SAT. I think we ranked 4th. Look at our scores compared to how the state and the nation did on the SAT. That's an apple-to-apple comparison. The cool thing in our district is the number of students taking the SAT is larger now than it's been in our history. Typically, when your population taking anything increases, the average would go down. So to have more students taking the test and have our average be higher than the state and the nation is a great, great indicator, at least in part, of the return on investment. Keep in mind, as you look at this data, our state is still ranked, I believe, 46 out of 50 on a per pupil funding basis. So the state of Washington has still not stepped up to meet the court order, which we'll talk about a bit later on. We still are doing pretty well as a system in light of the resources that we don't have to address the challenges and expectations that people have. Thanks, Amanda, for getting out some more data. Anyway, this is yours to keep. I just wanted to point that out to you, and I want to shift now to some other documents that you have. if you would find the big flyer that's got the picture of our school board visiting one of our schools, the big boiler in the background. This is the one I'd like to talk about next. I'm going to work through what's on the ballot on February 11th in our school district. Provide some information. This is yours to keep. How many of you recognize this from something that came in the mail within the last few days? Anyone? A few hands coming up? Yeah, we mailed out 70,000 of these, bulk mail, and they were to go to every mailbox, post office box, business address in our school district. Basic information about the proposition that's on the ballot so that everybody has it. It's all also posted on our webpage so people can get this information. I want to talk a little bit about how schools are funded and how we're not funded. People don't realize it, but at least in our state, the way that we fund schools is mostly, 70-some% mostly, from the state of Washington. Right? The state sends us something called an apportionment. It's a portion of money based on our student enrollment. It's 70-some cents of every dollar that we spend. The rest of that, a little bit comes from the federal government, but the rest of it comes from the local community in what's called a program and operations levy or a maintenance and operations levy. You'll even heard it talked about as a replacement levy. Well, those levies are like a subscription, anything you might know that expires after a certain amount of time. And a local replacement levy has to be renewed by the voters. Sure enough, on February 11th, it's our time as a school district to have the community vote, hopefully, to replace and renew that levy that expires. That's Proposition 1. And if you look at this handout, in the very middle of the handout on the front page, you'll see Proposition 1 and a little blue box to the right. Can someone hold that up? Got that? So right in the middle it says Proposition 1, and there's a blue scale box to the center, just to the right, and it outlines what things are included in the replacement levy. Now this is a replacement of a levy that expires, so it doesn't increase taxes, it just continues taxes to pay for those things that are in that box. But sometimes when you're working with a general fund budget that's upwards of $200 million a year, and you've got a replacement levy that's $50 to $60 million, people just think, well, this is just so abstract, it's hard for me to understand what's actually happening. So I've got kind of a visual image for you that works really well to understand the Proposition 1. I won't ask anybody to pull out a dollar bill, but imagine a dollar bill. It's 100 cents, right? So a dollar bill is 100%. It's 100 cents. Of every dollar we spend in the general fund, think of that dollar bill as our general fund. Let it represent our entire general fund, 100% of our general fund. 88 cents of every dollar we spend pays for the salary and benefits of the staff we employ. Just under 4,000 people in a district of nearly 20,000 students, 10th largest in the state out of 296 districts. All right? 88% of the dollar pays for the people we hire in every capacity across our system to do the work. What's left of that dollar for turning the lights on, providing supplies, materials, paper clips, fuel in the buses, just our basic operations? What percent is left over? You're going to need this to graduate. 12% is left over. So now you've got a really good picture of what happens in our general fund. Now I'm going to connect the peaks. Proposition 1 is a replacement levy, and it's part of that dollar. Guess what percent of the dollar it maintains? If you said, or were thinking 23%, you're correct. 23% of every dollar comes from this replacement levy. If and hopefully when the levy's replaced, it doesn't make the dollar bigger. It replaces 23 cents of the dollar that's already there. Right? It takes a simple majority, 50% or more, to replace Proposition 1. And again, that's to maintain the dollar. Envision in your mind, we don't have to go into details and hopefully never have to cross this bridge, but just envision for a moment what happens to the dollar if you pull 23% of it away. If 88% are people and 12 cents is left to operate, realizing you've got to turn the lights on and have a few paper clips, you're going to have some operational costs. You're going to have to cut into and reduce staff in a dramatic way. There are districts in our history in our state who tried to operate without that local levy. It's not pretty. It is not a system that people want to have happen. right? It is decimates programs, just absolutely decimates programs. We typically don't talk about this in a public way, right? People think, well, you're trying to scare people and it's negative, but you just have to be truthful with folks. That's how significant that replacement levy is in basic operations. It's much more palatable, it's much more positive. Frankly, it's still accurate to talk about what the levy helps us do because it helps to support state funding. So we go back to the front of that handout and you see that blue box that outlines what's funded. It is in fact paying for teachers that we couldn't hire if we didn't have the levy. And it's helping us to keep class sizes lower and to do all the things that are listed. So I'm going to move now, I want to shift focus and talk about Proposition 2. It doesn't cost us any more to put 2 items on the ballot, but we are very mindful how precious resources are for the public, and we don't want to ask taxpayers to put out any kind of resources unless there is a profound need, and we believe that there is. Our board has spent considerable time through study sessions. That picture on the front is not staged. We're actually out touring some of the schools that needed to be addressed, looking at the conditions with our expert staff, pointing out to them what some of the conditions are we're trying to address. Our board made a very careful decision to place another ballot proposition in front of the voters on February 11th, Proposition 2. So if you would refer back to the front of that big handout, again, I want to talk a little bit about that issue and answer some questions when we get there. Proposition 2 is a bond issue. And a bond issue isn't a replacement levy. It's not something you see that often. In fact, the last time you saw a bond issue on a ballot in our school district was February of 2006. I was here then. I probably had hair back in 2006. It's been 8 years, right? And Proposition 2 at that time was the bond issue that replaced Linwood High School and Middle School and did a host of other work in our system. All those projects were done on time and within budget. If you haven't seen those buildings, you should. They're very well done. They're going to last for 60 years or longer. They're very efficient. They help save our general fund money. Assume that you know what a bond issue is, so I'm going to spend a minute with that, talk through the work, talk about what the implications are, how this could affect taxpayers, and again, be happy to answer questions as we get to that point. A bond issue in a school district is similar to how a U.S. savings bond works. So you might know already that if you were to go buy a U.S. savings bond, you would pay money for that bond. The government would get your money, and it could do something with that money. But your promise is that the government would pay you back principal and interest over the life of that bond. It's a fairly safe investment because most people would believe that the government is going to be able to make good on that payment. So they consider it a safe investment, but in fact you get more back than you paid for. Proposition 2, if the community approves it with a 60% supermajority, different from Proposition 1, that's a simple majority. If Proposition 2 gets that supermajority, it authorizes our school board to issue bonds, to sell bonds. People, investors, buy the bonds. The school district gets the money to do the capital projects work, and we have the authority now to levy taxes to pay the principal and interest for the people that purchase the bonds. It's a $275 million bond issue, but this is important. If it gets, and hopefully when it gets 60% or more on the night of the election, it doesn't mean we have $275 million worth of debt the next day. It just gave the authority to the board to issue bonds. The school board doesn't sell $275 million worth of bonds the next day. In fact, it doesn't even sell all those bonds at one time. The board sells those in issuances, probably 3 different issuances of those bonds over a period of years. Why? Because you only want to do a certain amount of work at any given time. You don't want more taxes than necessary to pay back bonds, so you sell bonds you need to do that work to keep that moving forward. The impact of the taxpayer is something that can be regulated and managed by the district based on how many bonds we sell and how fast we sell them. So what would that look like? I'm trying to break it down from a big number to a household so you can get a handle on that. Take that same handout and open it up and go up to the upper left-hand corner. You're going to see a bar chart. So this would be page 2 on the inside, in the upper left-hand corner. You will see a bar chart where it looks like it snowed on the top of some of those little bars right across the top. If you, with my eyes you've got to squint, but if you can read the fine print, you'll notice that each one of those bars represents the current debt that people are paying in our school district. So you see the old program and operations levy that's going to expire and what that debt would look like when it's replaced. You'll see a capital technology levy that's in place that people are paying for. You'll see the old bond issues that were approved before and people are paying on those, and those get paid off over time. That's why it steps down when you go out to the right. And then you'll see the little tip of white that's added. If the $275 million bond issue, Proposition 2, is approved by 60% or more of our voters on February 11th, the little white tip is the amount that's added. So how do you make sense out of that number, which is still abstract? If you own a home valued at approximately $300,000, it will be just under $12 a month for that home to pay the bond for a year. Just under $12 a month is the cost to a home valued at $300,000. If your home is valued at $600,000, it's just under $24 a month that you'll pay. It's an easy way to figure that out. Now, how do we compare on our rate per thousand when you take the total debt that's visible on that chart? How do we compare it to other communities? Same page, go straight down to the left. Straight down to the left at the bottom, you'll see another bar chart that shows our combined tax per thousand of assessed valuation compared to other communities. Can somebody tell me, just I'm going to speculate here, why are we on the lower side of that bar chart on the rates per thousand? What's unique in the Edmonds School District when you look at that list of the different communities that would cause our rates per thousand to be lower on the average than the others that are listed? What's unique about our community?
Property line?
Perfect, right? The more business and economic development you have in a district, the more value there is in the property, and the rates are lower. When you vote to approve a levy or a bond, especially with the levy, you'll see an estimated rate per thousand that's on the ballot. It is totally an estimate. You want to know why? Because you're approving and authorizing a dollar amount, not a rate per thousand. The dollar amount is divided over assessed valuation. That's how they figure out what the rate is. So that rate will change. Every bit of growth, any growth in the school district increases assessed valuation, and the next time they calculate the rate per thousand, typically it's lower because you've got a bigger base that you're working with. So we try to be very conservative. We like to tell people that we'll actually perform better, faster, for less than what they're expecting, because that's really what works for people. They don't want to be surprised with their taxes, and they want to make sure that we get the work done. Every bit of capital projects work, frankly, everything we do in the budget goes before your elected board members. They have to approve that. They have regular sessions twice a month. They have study sessions, all the other opposite Tuesdays, where they go in and look deeply at the various things we're trying to do as a system. So you have great board members and a supportive community, a lot of very dedicated, talented people in every walk of life in our system, trying to do the best we can with the resources we have. I want to spend just a minute and talk about what's in this bond issue, and maybe talk a little bit about a court case that leads to one of the cool opportunities that we have. If you go back to the front and you look at the lower right, you'll notice there's a list of projects. Safety, heating, ventilation systems, roofs. There's a link on our webpage, and you can go to that and you can find exactly what's planned for every school. This school that we're in right now has a lot of classes right now in what are called the flex areas. These are the spaces between the classrooms. Included in this bond issue is the ability to add a couple probably portable or modular classrooms somewhere on campus so we can move classes out of the flex area and be able to restore those areas to their original purpose, right? But there's more than that. There's all kinds of projects scheduled across the district. When you look at that list, you'll notice it's not just regular upgrades and improvements and capital facilities issues across the system. There's also some very specific things that are mentioned. Replacing Lyndale Elementary School, replacing Madrona, replacing Alderwood Middle School, and moving it to some property owned next to Martha Lake Elementary. A major modernization of Spruce Elementary, Linwood Elementary, and Mount Lake Terrace Elementary, and adding capacity at many of our elementary schools that need capacity. You say, well, why would they need capacity? If our district is relatively flat in enrollment, why would we need to add space at our elementary schools? This is a really cool opportunity that we have, and frankly, it's going to be available in the state of Washington. How many of you are familiar with something called McCleary versus the state of Washington? Any hands go up? There's a few folks who recognize that. Several years ago, our school district combined with some other stakeholder groups, and we sued the state of Washington. It wasn't meant to be anything personal, all right? We sued the state of Washington because it wasn't meeting its constitutional mandate to amply fund K-12 education. The court ruled in our favor. The state appealed the ruling to the state Supreme Court. It was presented to the state Supreme Court. The state Supreme Court affirmed the lower court ruling. Why am I talking about a court case relative to a bond issue? Because in the state's testimony, as part of that case, the state promised to spend billions of more dollars on K-12 education. That was part of the state's defense. Its defense was laid into a bill called House Bill 2261, and it included all-day kindergarten. And it included lowering class sizes dramatically in grades K-3. The Supreme Court said in the appeal at the state Supreme Court level to the state, you need to do what you said you're going to do. And we're going to retain jurisdiction and hold you accountable for it. We're starting to see the pendulum swing. This year, it wasn't a lot, but this year we got $10 million in our general fund budget of additional funding from the state to start to dig out of the hole we've been in of state budget cuts. We've cut somewhere in the range of $40 million since 2009. So $10 million is definitely a block back in the right direction, but we're not back to ground level of where we started. But in the money we got was money to lower class sizes and to start adding all-day kindergarten. Here's where it becomes relevant to the bond issue. How do we add all-day kindergarten and lower class sizes without the facility capacity to do that? Mukilteo School District, ring a bell for anybody here? Did you see what happened last summer? Mukilteo turned down $1.5 million of state funding to fund all-day kindergarten in the Mukilteo School District, to increase all-day kindergarten. Why? Because they didn't think it was a good idea? Any guesses?
They didn't have space.
They didn't have space. And they've had that problem for years. They've been on the ballot before to try to solve that problem, and surprise, surprise, they'll be on the ballot again in February to try to solve that problem. So we have a mix. And now I want to refer to Stuart. Is the map out to folks, the colored map?
Yep.
Find a little map that has a whole bunch of little colored boundaries, make sure. This is our school district. And not the one that shows the middle school, but go to the one that shows a lot of little colored areas. Those are the boundaries around our elementary schools. Some of these have been this way for years. Then you'll notice a little white block that should identify the school. And there's a little legend to give you an idea of the code. Stewart and staff did a very careful review of our capacity. And at some of our elementary schools, like Seaview or Edmonds Elementary School, there's enough capacity to have all-day kindergarten and lower class sizes for a few years without having to add anything. But look at Spruce Elementary, right in the center, towards the top. In order to realize the promise of all-day kindergarten and lowering class sizes based on the enrollment and the capacity of that school, we have to add 9 additional classrooms. Go to Linwood Elementary and Mount Lake Terrace Elementary, 5 to 6 classrooms, and Lindale, which is on the list to be replaced. We have schools, in order to make this happen, we've got to add classroom space. Then somebody says, well, geez, heck, just move the boundaries. If you've got room at Seaview or at another school, just jerk the boundaries around. We need 53 or more classrooms. We don't have that kind of capacity. If we played with the boundaries, and you know how happy you and others would be if we started to move boundaries, right? All we do is temporarily address a couple of the space issues. And then you start to realize that to really spread it out, we're going to have kids bust over an hour. Young kids bust over an hour and a half in some cases if we try to swing them across the district. Make the best use out of the resources we have, that you can stand in the front of Hilltop Elementary and look across the street at the fire station, and the first house is to the left, and they go to Briar Elementary. You can live across the street from Hilltop Elementary, but you can't go there, right? If we move the boundaries anymore, we're going to be driving past the school in your neighborhood to go to some other school. And who wants that? So honestly, to honor neighborhood schools, to be able to realize the promise of all-day K and lower class sizes, the only rational answer is to add capacity to those neighborhood schools based on enrollment and what's projected to happen. And that's what this map is. We could spend an hour just looking at this, but I wanted you to understand that in the bond issue, that component that's designed to add additional classroom space is based on some research that was done. Now, people say, well, how fast will the all-day kindergarten come in? Here's the sandwich. It's just about to be 2014. We're already seeing some additional money from the legislature right now as I speak. We've added 2 classrooms at Spruce Elementary just to start to make this happen, because the way the state's adding the money is based on the higher population of free and reduced lunch. Those schools seem to be targeted first, which is just fine. There's got to be some way of rolling it out, right? Districts need time to get the facilities ready. But the other end of that sandwich, the bracket, is the court said you have to have it done by 2018. There's a lot of political support for all-day kindergarten and lower class sizes, right? If you survey people, those resonate very high in terms of people's values about education. So in about a 4-year window of time, the state has to meet that requirement. We are not overly early. If the bond issue is passed in February, given the time it takes to modernize, construct, add space, we've got to be scampering to stay ahead of the resources to be able to offer that program. We do not want to be like other districts that are having to turn down the state money because they don't have a place to put the students and put the classroom. So that's some of the background that's relevant to what's on that list. I did mention that there's some replacement of schools. We have a Citizens Planning Committee. Some of you know of that, maybe some have served on that. The Citizens Planning Committee, actually Linda here, who's been on it for years and does a great job with our Ed Committee and others, they do a lot of research. They look into different questions and different issues that we have, and there's a facility committee on Citizens Planning Committee. Most all of this work has a history of being looked at by that citizens group with expert staff. When you see Lyndale School and Madrona and Alderwood Middle School, they were needs 8 years ago. They were on the list 8 years ago to be addressed, but we didn't have enough money to do everything. So we did Linwood High School and Madrona Middle School, which were actually in worse shape. I want to tell you a quick story about some of the conditions that we deal with. And really thanks to our support staff, some who are here in the back, we make miracles happen every day that people don't fully appreciate. It was last winter. I got a call that Lyndale Elementary School was getting cold, the boiler had gone out, a part was broken, and we didn't have a part to replace it. The boiler at Lyndale Elementary School is older than me and younger than dirt, right? That thing has been here a long time. It should be an antique. Probably is in some registry. That boiler in that school is that old. So I go to the school and I meet some of our maintenance crew in the boiler room, which is no longer warm. It's starting to get itself to cool off. And we're talking about what do we do? Because it's before lunch. The building's already starting to cool off because it's freezing outside. This particular part is available at one place that we can find somewhere in the Midwest. And the Point Express couldn't get it there any faster than the next day or two. So we got a problem. And we got the building getting cold, kids and staff and parents just see this thing cascading. Last thing you want to do as a superintendent is send kids home early, right? Especially in the dead of winter. Now parents got schedule problems, the houses are cold, there's just all kinds of issues with that. Mark, one of our maintenance guys, he says, you know, I think there's a part on the Westgate boiler at Westgate Elementary that would match this boiler. So he drives over there, he superheats the boiler at Westgate to get that building warm and toasty. He takes that part off the boiler at Westgate, drives over to Lyndale, puts it on the Lyndale boiler, turns the Lyndale boiler on, gets it warm for 2 hours, takes the part off, drives back to Westgate. You see a pattern here? He literally is shuttling this part back and forth between the two schools every couple of hours to use the same part to keep both boilers operating, at least part-time, to keep the buildings warm. Students don't know, staff don't know, parents don't know. There's no safety issue. It's a heck of an inconvenience, not the greatest use of a staff person's time, but we kept both buildings operating until the part arrived and we were able to replace it. Now, because of a capital levy that was approved a couple years ago, we have some money to replace the boiler at Westgate. Lyndale, we're hoping we can replace the whole school. You don't want to put good money after bad, so we're limping along with that boiler. But rest assured, that part from the old Westgate boiler is in a box under the boiler at the Lyndale School, waiting for whatever's going to happen this year, if that is an issue. I share the story. It's a little bit humorous, but it's true. But it paints a picture. It gives you an idea that we're not talking about replacing schools that look like this one. We're talking about replacing schools that are worn out. At Madrona, there is a crack through the brick walls that just spirals all the way up. In fact, the picture on the front of this newsletter is the boiler room at Madrona. It's nothing against the school committee. Good staff, good kids, good parents, good community. The building's worn out. And the cost of maintaining these or trying to Band-Aid or duct tape or baling wire those together is worse than if we just replace them. That's why they're on there to be replaced. In the case of Spruce, Mount Lake Terrace, and Linwood, where we need a lot of capacity, and the building is old, but not as old, a modernization is planned. That's maybe a $10 million project instead of 20 or 30. It modernizes the facility that's there. It uses a lot of what's there and adds to it, adds space and adds some infrastructure capacity so that it works. And at other schools, it's just a question of adding some capacity. You'll notice included on the list, on that front page, is moving our transportation, custodial, warehouse, maintenance, and grounds crew. That building, which is currently behind the Michaels on Alderwood Mall Boulevard. Most people know where I'm talking about. You see the buses on the freeway when you drive by. So the plan is to move those. If you go to the inside, I think there's a picture on the right-hand side of the inside of that big bifold. You'll see the current location, aerial photo of the buses, I think, in the lot, and you'll see off 52nd where the property that we own ready for that new facility. We have people interested in buying the property or leasing the property. We've got to be able to afford to build a new bus barn, that new location, in order to vacate the property that we're on. Some people who are here may remember back in '06, part of our plan was to take some surplus properties, right? The old Linwood High School, for one, right across from the Alderwood Mall, and to harness the value of those properties to get revenue to the district, go into the capital projects budget to do other capital projects work. The plan is still in place. The value of the properties in today's economy is different than they were in 2008. There was a German bank in 2008 that was willing to loan us $150 million before one piece of dirt was turned on the old Linwood High School project, just based on the concept of the revenue that was going to come. If we had borrowed that money then, right, we'd have had the money, but we'd have had the debt. And then the market fell, the economy fell, the value of everybody's property fell dramatically, 30-some% in Snohomish County. So our properties now aren't going to generate that revenue that they would have in '08. It's a really good thing we did bite on that hook and borrow that money. It'd have been nice to have it, right? But then how would we have paid that debt, right? You don't borrow, you don't make a loan unless you can make payments. And our plan with the old Linwood property is once it's fully developed is to use the lease revenue to make payments on money we borrow without costing taxpayers to do additional capital projects work. This bond issue is $275 million. That's a big number. Our need across our whole school district to do all the buildings is about $700 million plus. So this is a big step forward, and maybe in 6 or 7 years, there'll be somebody talking to this community about the next step we need to take, right? Because we've still got to keep moving forward. Keeping old buildings running is part of this, but also replacing some buildings. But there's a point at which we're going to have to look at this again, and if you go back to that chart on the inside cover in the upper left-hand corner, you can see that it's designed to have the community have that option several years from now if they want to do another bond issue. That's partly that design. Yes, question?
I have a question. You bring out, certainly we don't want kids in buildings that are costing more to repair because they're falling down than it does to upgrade them and replace them. And that makes complete sense. But I'm sitting here in an extremely nice theater, and I'm sitting here going, what is need to replace based on safety and need to replace based on what's cost effective? And what is, these are luxuries that may or may not make sense in today's economy, because certainly it's nice to have a theater like this, but if you look at the district and what's an effective theater program, as I mentioned to you, you have another theater program at another school that, will be putting on 10 musicals this year, 3 of which will be high school musicals that draw in people from the community. The school's winning multiple awards. It's obviously a fantastic program that's working out of a theater that, it's the old Edmonds Woodway High School theater that is nowhere, they can't leave up props like this on a stage because their stage is basically an auditorium that is used all week long. So it's one of those, they're working with bare bones and getting fantastic results. What's neat, how do we know that you're going for replacing needs versus going for top of the line that may or may not be necessary, especially in an economy where a lot of people are struggling to make ends meet?
Well, you're asking a good question, and it's got lots of parts to it. So I'll try to respond to the different parts of it, but I may not satisfy what you're asking about. Fair enough?
Okay.
The Citizens Planning Committee that vets or reviews the projects that made the list, said that even though there's a lot of needs across the whole district, that's that $700 million number, these are the ones that are the most important. So that's the first part. How did they make the list? Based on a process of objectively evaluating the building. So it's not whose kids go to school there or who likes different programs. It's an objective review of the condition of the facility. The other part of your question had to do with like the theater. I don't think you're suggesting that the theater crew at the old Woodway High School have a less of a facility. You'd like to see them have a better facility, right?
No, I'm not saying, but I'm saying what they have is effective and works for them. And, this is a top-of-the-line theater. They don't have it, but they're still able to put on great plays.
Right.
So to have a nice theater that, how many, they put on, I calculated it out, 10 plays this year, 31 performances. I'm not sure how many are going to be put on in this theater, how it's going to be used, but it's one of those precisely what's needed versus what's a luxury that is just used to show off.
Well, this room, to part of your question, this room isn't used just for theater. There's large group instruction and there's different meetings that they have in here. So it's not just used for theater. Okay, so it's got more utility than that. Also, our new buildings are designed by committees that include parents. It's not just some staff that go into the room with the architect and design the school. There's parent involvement as well in the design and specifications of buildings that we modernize. So it's not just my values or your values that would design what the theater might look like in a school. It's a function of what the community tries to interact with us to tell us what they want the building to look like. And this is actually what they would design if they spent new money, not the old Woodway High School.
Well, obviously, that's what I'm saying. Do we necessarily need, is this truly a need? And when you put out to vote, people say, you're building their school, okay, but we don't get to vote on, are you fixing something that's unsafe? Or are we building a brand new state-of-the-art school? We don't get to vote on, do we get to provide a serviceable, reliable model, or do we have to buy top-line catalog?
Well, I would argue, and I don't mean to be argumentative, that we're not doing top-of-the-line catalogs. Let's take, because it just happened recently, let's take the old Linwood High School that was built and lasted about 20 years with 200 outside doors and a flat roof in the northwest where it rains all the time. Right? And that was before your and my time here. But this committee at one point thought that was a cost-effective solution. Right? Built it on the cheap, lots of kids, growing fast, got to have a school. Compared to the new Linwood High School, 60-plus years in design, where it captures the light from the outside, it captures the heat from the outside, and reduces the operational cost because of its efficiencies. It's a different animal completely. Your safeguard as a taxpayer are the elected board members who review the project designs. They do. They don't just rubber stamp that. They look at that and ask some of those tough questions. Is this the best use of public funds? Is it too fancy or not? Let me tell you a story about this school. It's got some humor to it, but it's interesting because it's true about perceptions. Do you know the clock tower on the top? Have you seen that when you drive by on the outside? Check it out in the daylight sometime. Look at the top. You'll see the face of a clock on what looks like a clock tower. This is back in '06, and I was talking about the other bond issue. I was actually at a church, and they gave me an opportunity to speak, provide information between the services. So it was just an informational meeting. And one of the gentlemen who was there, he said, well, I'm not voting for anything in the school district because you got this big expensive clock tower on the new Edmonds-Woodway High School, and I think that's a waste of money. That was his perspective. Not saying it's yours. But he didn't understand that all of the heating and ventilation equipment that otherwise would have been exposed to the weather and poke holes in the roof in a rainy northwest is housed in that tower. It's really a mechanical vault. You'll see some louvers on the side that allows fresh air to get in. So it's easy to service and maintain it, and it's out of the rain. After they built the mechanical vault, they put a very inexpensive clock on the front of it, so it made it look better. That's the clock tower. Now, he said, you know, I feel terrible because I told everybody it was this big expensive clock tower. It looked like this architect's legacy. It had no function, no purpose to it. It's a waste of our money. Wanted to know what he could do. And I just asked if he could remember everybody else he talked to for the last several years and go back and straighten him out on that, which he committed to doing. So I don't know that we'll ever agree on what's too nice and what's too little and what that looks like. But we do as much as we can to have a community process, provide this information, answer questions, have an elected board that oversees ultimately what we do, and that's where the decision rests. You don't have to vote to approve the bond issue. You could say, well, no, I don't think we should do anything, and that's the choice that you have.
Much information, you know, what we're approving, you know, I know we're replacing a school. Okay, are we going to put like a theater like this in a middle school? Are we going to be doing really fancy stuff like that so it's top of the line?
We have one of our parents and citizen planning committee members who'd like to comment.
Hi, thanks. I was on the Facilities and Operations Subcommittee for the CPC for a couple of years, and one of the things we looked at was building capacity, and when I was on it, it was during the design and construction phase of the new Meadowdale Middle School. And what was really interesting to me, everything I do is data-driven. All I think about is numbers all the time. One of the things that was really interesting to me was that the usable square footage per kid in the design of Meadowdale Middle School went way down compared to the schools that were built in the 60s because they became much more efficient in the way they laid out the school. Have you ever been to Meadowdale Middle? No. That's the way schools are going to go in this district. They're very, very efficient spaces. There aren't hallways. There are open learning spaces instead. There isn't a dedicated theater. The practice rooms are different. The flex space that serves as the lunchroom is also the auditorium area. And it came in well under budget and doesn't have all of the fancy stuff that a school like this one that was built in the peak of the economy has. And I mean, this was built in 1998, and that was when we were rolling in money. And I don't think that an auditorium like this will ever be built again.
There's, whenever a new school is built, there's an entire process called an educational specification process, or EdSpec. And what that does is that's a process that involves staff, oftentimes students, community members, of when you build a new school, what goes in it. And so what does a base classroom look like? What's in it? Cabinets, carpet. What does a science room look like? Science room looks different than a regular classroom because you have different needs there. You have different storage requirements. How big, what kind of a need is there in terms of gym space, locker room space? What kind of need is there for a theater? Because there's a drama department, a music department that may use the same space. What drama classes are we going to have and where are they going to be in their space? So if you were to go to Linwood High School, which is was built in 2009, just a few years ago, they do have an auditorium like this, and you should go look. It's very nice, it's very functional, but it was a part of the EdSpec process that the community said, we need to have this space. And if you're interested, if you really want to know, I bet you we could pull out those EdSpecs that are in multiple books about that thick, and you could specifically read on why that space was put in Linwood High School.
Yeah.
And that it wouldn't be in some other school because there isn't this specific need.
Yeah, but if y'all could make some of that information public, you know, these are some of the requirements, and, because we offer these classes, we need these specific things, and it's not, we're going,
Right.
and you put the stories out there that we need to replace it because of this.
Mhm.
Because
Yes, that's a good-
otherwise,
Mhm.
because, if a person sitting, has a kid in a 50-year-old school, they're going, why should I pay for that when my kid's in a 50-year-old school?
Right.